Nick, pleasure to have you on the show. Like we were talking about just before recording, there's like a lot of ground to cover. There's a lot of interesting topics. I think that we have a lot of things in common to talk about or interests in common. First area I want to dive into is the role of CTO. You've been a CTO, fractional CTO for a long time. Has the role evolved since you've been doing it now for like X plus years? Curious to hear a little bit about the role itself.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Nectar. So the role of CTO, I think it really depends on what type of CTO you want to be and what kind of CTO the company needs in a lot of ways. And starting with the just basic expectation alignment, every company needs a different type of CTO, every team needs a different type of CTO, and every person is a different type of CTO. I think a lot of, especially on the startup side, a lot of founders are thrust into the position. The most technical of the founders automatically takes up the title, mantle of the CTO. That's great. That's scrappy. That's agile, especially from what the startup needs at that time. But there's a bit more of a holistic approach. And it's almost like a product mindset. What is your value proposition? What are you bringing to that role in a lot of ways? Me personally, I'm technical background and all that. But over the years, I've come to really realize that I make the biggest impact through others, through setting teams up for success by doing a little more of the business development and really focusing on the customer and the product side of that CTO lens, if you will. And that might be a very different than approach that other CTOs might take. You have the famous examples of the John Carmacks and all that who are the super technical in the weeds, rolling up their sleeves, being super hands-on. That's great for them and the company that they build, but you need to be explicit about it. What does your team need? What kind of CTO do you need? If you have a highly biz devy CEO, maybe you need a more technically focused CTO. If you have a very hands-on team and a VP of engineering who's already in the weeds, you don't necessarily need a second person who's taking up that thing. And so identifying what gaps you have on the team and how you can bring success and your team up for success and provide value to those gaps. It's a product market fit at a certain point, but internally facing in a lot of ways. And so has the role evolved over my time there? I'd say I've evolved and I've learned a lot about where I best fit. And so I'll choose my teams, my companies. Back when I had my fractional CTO consultancy, my clients about how I can best provide value, whether that be, that technical leader who's in the weave with the code, with the design and things like that, or maybe more of a coach on the people side. I had Nick's 3 Ps back when I had my consultancy, people, process, and product. And I find that you can have the best idea in the world and the best technical side, but if you don't think about the people, the teams that set that up for success, if you don't think about your development processes and how you deliver value to your customers, and you don't think about it as a product perspective, all that technical side often goes to waste. The best idea doesn't matter if nobody wants to buy it.
Said, very well said. Yeah, I like the people, process, and product. I'm going to steal that. And you shared a lot of nuggets of wisdom. I could double click on some of them, but in terms of pitfalls, like what you've seen, you coach and you mentor a lot of startups. I don't think I think you said there's no one universal truth, right, for these things, right? Everything's like dependent, right? Like my answer for everything is it depends. But I'm pretty sure you've seen some things that are maybe more universal in terms of stuff to avoid. So if there are any startup founders earlier in their career that are listening, any words of wisdom?
Oh, I have my portfolio companies and the startups I work with are going to laugh. They listen to this episode and just hear me like a broken record player repeating certain things. One of my favorite expressions is explicit and not implicit. So, be open, be transparent, be very clear and articulate what you need and why. Big fan of user stories and things like that. Who's the persona? What do they want? Why do they want it? And if we position things in that context, in that light, it empowers the engineering teams and the people, the boots on the ground in a lot of ways to explore solution space through the lens of problem space instead of already being locked into a certain solution. We don't want to dictate what needs to be done. We want our creative engineers that we've hired and are trying to empower to get the job done through the best way possible for the customers we're building for in a lot of ways. So that works well for product development. It works well for just general sprint, agile, scrum, whatever you're doing, stakeholder management. And it works well for people and leadership and things like that. Other more maybe opinionated ideas I have is, especially for early stage startups, I don't like planning past 3 months. I find it gets too wishy-washy when you try and do a year, 2 year long business plan roadmap, especially on the technical side for an early stage startup. You're going to pivot so many times within even a year that it's good to have a mission vision. I'm a big fan of even just writing it up on a whiteboard for everyone to always be looking up at their computer screens and seeing. But locking yourselves into objectives and milestones that are 6 months, 9 months, 12 months out, you might not even be the same company by then. So really focus on the now while being in the same direction of where you want to go down the line. Having that North Star is important. It also helps loosen up your planning. It lets you focus on, let's just get to work and deliver value. Take a step back, reevaluate, iterate, and move on. Even within the teams I'm building that SmartOne, we tried to act as a startup internally. Yes, we're a bigger organization and whatnot, but the R&D team, the labs team that I have around me, and our initiatives, our go-to-market initiatives, our projects, we want to be scrappy and agile. And that's a good, at least in my opinion, a good approach to take no matter the size of the business, but especially in such an emerging and dynamic market like AI and data, where every 3 weeks there's a new paradigm shift in AI, a new foundation model that's released that completely changes the landscape. And so you need to be ready for that. And planning too far out, you're going to miss the boat.
Yeah, yeah. What's the expression, right? Like a good plan executed today is better than the perfect plan executed next week. It got me thinking a little bit. I don't know if you saw the post about founder mode over this past weekend, the Paul Graham at ASA. And you raised the point that's making me think. I'm just going to riff on this idea. I think it's very obvious if you're a startup, you're 5 or 10 people, then yeah, plans don't matter. And then everyone's in the weeds. But then I think the post says that, hey, people like Airbnb and like other big companies have managed to keep this like startup ethos, even at scale, right? So obviously companies like even like Tesla or SpaceX with Elon, like famous micromanagement down to the X decimal and really keeping the sense of urgency. And yeah, so have you thought about this at all? Like you mentioned, right, this notion of keeping that kind of that startup mentality, even in large organizations. We're going to talk about SmartOne, obviously, but yeah, curious to hear you a little bit.
So definitely, I don't think it requires micromanagement. At least that's not my style. At the very least, I'm very much focused on mission driven. If everybody's on the same mission, if they're empowered, now you can work independently. A requirement, however, for that is hiring correctly. And so that's probably honestly and this comes back to the people side of the 3 Ps. One of the most important things any company could do is hire the right people. If you don't hire the right people, of course, you're going to need to micromanage or course correct or whatnot, because you didn't start with the right ingredients from the very beginning. And so from that point going forward, if you have the right people in place and if you have the right, lean processes, all you need is a good, strong mission and they're empowered to just go with it. Yeah, there's definitely in some of the examples you put a top-down philosophy that's propagated. Airbnb is a famous example of design. The founders were designers and everything from their UI UX to the customer journey is based on the concept of design. And how do we want people to feel about the product and our services and our offerings? SpaceX and Tesla is about a core mission at the end of the day. How do we get humans to become an interplanetary species? Step one, get them to Mars. How do we get them to Mars? We need reusable rockets. How do we get reusable rockets? We need this spin to work. And my work as maybe like, electrical technician is to make sure that this fin works as best as can, because that's the missing link that a lot of companies don't have. They're focused too much on the day-to-day and the small tasks. They don't realize, what am I doing now? What kind of impact will it have on the future for the company, for humanity, if you want to think that big?
Yeah, great insights, man. Great insights. I feel like maybe it's a good segue to talk a little bit about you, right? Like in your journey. I'm going to come back to mentorship and its importance and why you do it and why you spend so much time on it. First, let's talk a little bit about like how you went from medicine to tech. Did you like how that shift happened? And then, yeah, give us a little bit of the quick exact summary.
Yeah. So the quick ones, we call me a jack of all trades. I'm 100% a generalist. I started my career wanting to go into pre-med, all ready to go. I took a hard left turn, decided to do mechanical engineering first and did a double degree with biomedical engineering. Still got a little taste of medicine, but spent undergrad building race cars for the most part. And from that, spent nearly a decade in biomedical. So I got to cut my teeth at a wonderful, scrappy, small biomedical research and development company, actually co-located right next door to Mila over here, Rogue Research, where we did moonshot projects. We did the 0 to 1. We took IP from universities, crossed that chasm of death from research into commercial, and brought ideas to market in cognitive neuroscience, brain imaging, surgical robots, implant design, things like that. And so from there, I got exposure to regulatory environments, Health Canada, FDA, and saw the paper and processes side of the world, but realized that the real value is bringing your ideas to market. And my big aha moment was when I started to scrub into surgeries and seeing my products, my designs, my mechanical engineering really being used on patients, on real people, bringing literal value to their lives or the operations. Then I caught the startup bug and went through a founder fuel with the YPC Technologies back in the day doing food robotics. Eventually landed on being the head of engineering at Aeon 3D, doing 3D printers for the industrial, aerospace, biomedical market, where what happens if we could revolutionize manufacturing through additive manufacturing, through generative technologies, way back before any generative AI stuff even existed. And so that was fun. Started raising money with them. The company eventually had 3D printed parts on the space station or on the moon. So got to do some real literal moonshot projects with them. In parallel, I got my taste of AI. So this was when the AI, one of the many AI revolutions was going on. And so I did a PhD in robotics and AI over at ETS here in Montreal and got to explore the idea of human system collaboration, human AI collaboration, human robot collaboration, and what can that bring to everything from manufacturing to medicine. So that my PhD thesis was based on human robot collaboration in medical ultrasound, through how can we just collaborate with intelligent systems. And eventually that led me to one of my bigger startups was now called 1X, used to be called Robotics, where we built humanoid robots. And so we scaled that to offices across Montreal, Norway, Italy, Texas, San Francisco, and built humanoid robots originally for the security guarding market and the industrial market, large TAMs across the world. Deployed them with ADT commercial back in the day, all the way to now they did 100 million plus sprays with OpenAI, and now they're really focusing on the humanoid robot market for household and consumers. What does the B2C look like? And I love that idea. That was truly a mission-driven company of what does the future look like when we have Android assistants in our day-to-day lives? And you start to take a step back from there. What do you need to build that? You need quite a team and AI that doesn't exist yet, and embodied AI that lives in these incredible mechatronic systems that we don't even have the technology with yet. So we had to build those systems. We had to build the AI really from the ground up. And they actually just launched some great demos last week of their latest system that I'm so proud of the team over there.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking at the 1X website right before recording, and I was like, "Holy crap!" And you also mentioned like small details. Hey, you raised 100 million from OpenAI.
Yes.
Not many people that I know in Canada have done that. I want to get the smart
That
one.
was quite an adventure. Looking
Yeah,
back on that, definitely
yeah. What year
that's
was
something
this?
that. So I took an exit from 1X right when I had my first kid. And so that's 2022 and came back to Montreal to start my fractional CTO consultancy. So well, I'm sure we'll talk about the mentorship and whatnot, but I saw a bit of a gap in the market from when founders and startups leave the accelerators. So I was working with Next AI, Techstars, Founder Fuel, and Creative Destruction Lab. And there's so much support and mentorship at that early stage. You got your first check, you did the 0 to 1, and then the accelerators stop. And there's this gap until you do your Series A or big seed round to keep you going. And in that gap, especially in hard tech, where I specialize with robotics and systems, it's really difficult. There's a lot of capex. There's a lot of pitfalls that if you could avoid them, you can save money and go faster and get to market and get to that next round. And so I decided, let's take my experience, let's take my mentorship and turn that essentially into a product, services-based product. And so I started Nadeau Innovations. Promised my wife that it'd be just a couple days a week as consulting while we had our first kid together. And that grew. And eventually it grew large enough. Met the team over at SmartOne, where they acquired Nadeau Innovations, and I got the hot seat of the CTO of the global org.
Yeah, very customized, very, very impressive. I want to say it's like you're like the world's most interesting man in terms of background. I find in your
Yeah, I
short career
appreciate
so
that,
far.
Nectar.
There's so many different areas. I want to get the smart one, but maybe just to double click on robotics for a second, right? People have been saying how we're going to have a humanoid robot that's going to be in the home, sub $10,000. There's going to be hundreds of millions of these things around. What's your thesis on this? The notion of creating value for people, right? Using robots. What are your thoughts on it?
100%. It's funny. I remember like pitching to investors and things like that, saying, "What's the TAM of human labor? It's infinite," and you can't really put that on a pitch deck. So even just bringing it up into markets, they call it, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls it hand laborers and material movers in the United States. Just that moving boxes from point A to B in a warehouse is nearly a $300 billion market in just the United States. And so you start to look at these applications where the robots can go to in these intelligent systems, and what can you build from that? What value proposition can you penetrate these markets with? And if you can vertically integrate, you can also horizontally scale very easily. If you can build a warehouse robot, can you move into the household afterwards? And the way I like to look at it is robots and intelligent systems as a whole really went from well-structured environments. So you have the industrial robots in factories, everything is in the place, bolted down in work cells, to semi-structured environments. So we have clear path robotics and whatnot navigating, you know, dynamic, but still everything is aisles and corridors in a warehouse or a factory, to now very unstructured environments. So the human world, the dynamic, chaotic nature, where I still have nightmares about how every door is different in every building. Even within a building, all the doors are different, never mind country to country. And how do you build not only in one room, but across the world at a certain point, is these incredible challenges to work on. But it all comes back to what's the value proposition at the end of the day. And I have lots of little expressions. The 4 Ds of robotics: dull, dirty, dangerous, and dear. And every AI and robotic application probably traces its value proposition to at least one of those 4 Ds. And if not, it's probably a fancy application for the sake of being fancy. But you think of it, robotics, dull is anything that's tedious and repetitive, warehouse work. Dirty, places humans don't want to go to. Great examples is moving soiled linens across the hospitals and things like that. So the CHUM in Montreal is a great example where they have these little mobile robots that bring the dirty linens to and from rooms to the central laundry area. Dull, dirty, dangerous, where we don't want to send humans in due to health and safety implications. So sending robots into the Fukushima nuclear reactor is a great example of that. And then dear are those applications where we have a high quality threshold or requirement, or it's just too costly to do with people. And so you can always connect your value proposition in different ways, but that it comes back to just that simple notion of understanding what your value proposition is. And so with robotics, with them entering the human household, we already have them in factories. We already seen the first pilots start to spin up now, the humanoid systems in BMW, in other factory settings. The next step in the next 5 years is really getting them to people's household. Cost will be an issue. You'll always have the early adopters, but just AI, I find that the biggest blocker right now is more of a user experience problem. We can deploy robots in that to anywhere we want to. How do we as participants in this application interact with these systems? And we haven't even necessarily solved that, with LLMs, generative AI, or AI chatbots and whatnot. Is what does the next generation of user interface look like with these systems, these intelligent agents that are working alongside us in the digital space and alongside us in the real world space? And I would say it almost has to be as simple as using an iPhone for humanoid robots and androids to be in our day-to-day lives. And there's still a lot of work to be done to get to that point.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. You zoom out, you look at the future and the hardware problem and the software problem. And if I look at we spoke about Tesla before and their Optimus robots. If you use Tesla self-driving, you could see the leaps and bounds that they made using their deep learning, especially in 12.5. Do you think, in essence, like we need to have, just like how Tesla has millions of cars to be able to hit like autonomy, it's the kind of the chicken and the egg problem. You can't deploy millions of robots to collect the data to get better. How do you think about that?
You said the magic word there, data. So Tesla probably has the world's largest data set of the outdoors in a lot of ways. Their cars are essentially vacuums of data across our entire outdoor, every street. And that's what Google Maps and Apple Maps and all the other street view type companies have been doing for the longest time, is you need to collect such a flywheel effect of data just to get your application off the ground. And now applying it to their robots in a lot of ways, they're going to start collecting a large indoor data set. There's a funny story that was told by the AI engineers over at Tesla. I saw on a few podcasts or a webinar a while ago, where the first iterations of the robot worked best in a parking lot because it thought it was a car, because the initial autopilot that was ported over to the robot to get that AI team off the ground and running was the car software in a lot of ways. But it also shows you that if you create these great solutions that are able to scale horizontally across your different initiatives, you can carry over a lot of your existing work. And Tesla, once again, an normal battery company, they're going to have a leg up when designing and developing their batteries for the robot, for instance, and taking a lot of that knowledge of manufacturing, battery design, the stamped metal and whatnot used for the cars, and bringing all that over to the robot side helps them at least get to market in a much more efficient way and maybe even help with cost reductions going forward. This might be advice for startup founders or even corporate innovation is think about your core businesses, your core services, and your core expertise and how you can extend that to either new markets, new ideas, retaining a lot of intellectual property, if you will, and expanding its reach.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting perspective. I like how you really bring the other side of it, looking at it really from the algorithmic level. And you mentioned the keyword data, right? So maybe a good entry point, talk about SmartOne. So the acquisition with Nadeau Innovations. SmartOne, my understanding, it's a data labeling company. And you imagine your initial customers are really using your services, like it's mostly big tech, I'd imagine, like companies that want to be at the forefront of machine learning. But then going back to your point about TAM, how sometimes I find TAM is a little bit useless, like mental model, at least most of the time in technology. So every company is going to need to be doing machine learning at a certain extent. So walk us through the acquisition and also maybe like more intelligently explain what SmartOne does.
Yeah, so definitely the acquisition, like all good stories, it started off as a joke where the founders asked, how can we get you their full-time CTO? And I made the joke, you can buy my company. And lo and behold, a few months later, that closed. But from there, it was complementary in a lot of ways. So you said it right. SmartOne originally, I'd call it, was a pure data labeling company. For in Madagascar, grew. Part of my consulting with them in the past was bringing them over to North America and establishing headquarters here in Montreal. We're now looking at the Mila AI Institute, working with phenomenal researchers in this incredible Montreal community that I'm very biased towards. But also having that alignment of values. One, we have an original team over in Madagascar of 1,000 plus people across many different disciplines and capabilities. And so we have that time zone overlap where we're able to target the expanding market of North America, especially Silicon Valley, but also be in touch with our team over in Madagascar, being that Montreal is very central to both. We have the language. Bilingualism in Montreal is a strong asset for both talking to our European, France, and Madagascar French colleagues and being able to address the mostly Anglophone English market in North America. And then also just access to talent, capital, non-dilutive funding, and all those other goodies that we have for Canadian and Montreal ecosystem. So that was a match made in heaven in a lot of ways of where to establish new headquarters. And then growing. So my focus at Nadeau Innovations was corporate innovation, startups, and really the beginning of the data and AI journey with strategic advisory, that cold start problem, that activation problem. Like, we want to get into AI. Where do we go from here? Or we have a product and idea. How do we bring it to market? Through the customer journeys, you have ideation, you have data procurement, you have data transformation, and you have the build, test, deploy of your product and AI. I was really focusing on the beginning and end of that journey with Nadeau Innovations. SmartOne was making magic happen at the center of that data transformation. And so coming together, we realized we can capture and provide value to the whole customer journey from idea through transformation, all which deployment. And with all good data and AI projects, it's like a drug a bit. Once you get started, there's no end to data and AI. It's a continuous cycle of innovation, collecting new data, transforming data, and getting back to market with new ideas, new evolutions of your product. And you keep going, especially in modern AI with these generative systems and whatnot. You have the notion of drift and groundedness where you need to keep feeding it new, fresh data, new interactions, and like basically course corrections to the behavior of it. There's a lot of, especially as these systems become much more autonomous. So I'm thinking like chatbots and customer support. You want to make sure that no regressions pop up, or else you have lots of those cases that we've seen on the internet, whether it's Google saying to glue your pizza, or I think it was Air Canada had the chatbot who offered like free flights or something like that. You want to make sure that you catch these bugs and these regressions before your customers do. And so it's definitely a lot more QA, QC essentially. So quality control and quality assurance that we're seeing in the market now as we deploy these systems. And we want to ensure that not only are we protected, but our customers are getting the best value and the best experience on that journey. And so now SmartOne, we position ourselves as a data solutions provider. We provide product, service, and solutions across the whole data journey from idea to data procurement to transformation to the end results of your product in the field. Whether you're an SME, a startup, or corporate innovation, you definitely need support along the way across all these things. And as the problem scales, data becomes its own operational headache that essentially takes you away from your customer, takes you away from your product, takes you away from your AI. And so we want to take that operational burden off the customer hands, provide our expertise for that so that, you can focus on your customer, your value, and you have a partner that will support you along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, super fascinating. I find it's like one of these not super well-known companies, like maybe just from my very like sample size of one, but one that's doing great fundamental work, right? Like in this notion of we're transitioning from like the industrial economy to the knowledge economy, there needs to be these types of companies that really help all sorts of other companies really understand their data, make use of it. If you double click a bit on the business model, right? So walk us through the customer journey of a company contacts you guys, and then either your main service offering. And then if you have time, I'd like to understand the ethical AI piece, right? How you're also helping communities across the world, notably like in the home country of Madagascar. So yeah, if you don't mind, then Nick.
Yep, let's go for it. So definitely, I guess the first place to start with understanding the customer journey, and sort of I mentioned before, ideation, data procurement, transformation, build, test, deploy in a lot of ways. But if we think about any value we create with AI, there are three legs to that. There's the models you use, and so we have our foundation models today and things like that. We have the compute side, so your NVIDIA chips or your Grok chips or ARM or Intel, whatever you're going to use. And then you have the data. And you need all three of those to support your AI and your actual application. And so we're not competing in the compute side. I don't plan to build chips anytime soon. And we'll build models and whatnot. But a lot of what we can do, especially with the open source movement, and big kudos to Meta and relation like things like the Llama models and whatnot, is that's become a new commodity on the market, essentially at certain point. We get to take these incredible open source innovations and then through our lens, through our expertise, through our niche domains that we operate in, bring value to our customers. But our big focus is on the data side. How can we enrich data? How can we transform data? How can we make sure that our customers' data is the right data a lot of the times? And the customer journey really depends on what customer you have. So we have startups we work with that for them, they just need help. Sometimes they need to get to market. They need to get to market fast. And instead of spending all their time literally labeling or transforming data, bringing our teams, bringing our expertise will help you transform it, whether it's through automated means. We have data pipelines that will do automated transformations and labeling to make it AI ready. Or sometimes, especially for novel data sources that have high quality requirements, whether that be medical imaging or really nuanced data like geospatial, we'll bring in humans to the loop. And back to my PhD, I'm a big believer in hybrid solutions. There's a whole class of companies and startups and SaaS platforms out there that are trying to automate everything off the shelf and say that you don't need humans loop anymore. An AI will label that for you. State of the art models right now, you're getting 50 to 6% quality precision metrics on those auto labeling things. So for a lot of applications, that's not good enough. If you're doing just cats and dogs, cars and people, maybe the models will be better for those well-known classes, but especially for the more novel data sets that we're starting to see and the precision data that we're starting to see these days, you can't just automate it. And then you have the other companies that are just throwing more humans at the problem. And that's not less of a scalable at a certain point. I experienced that when building humanoid robots. There comes a point where scalability, you just can't collect, can't transform, can't process enough data just by throwing more people at it. And so you have to come to some sort of middle ground solution. That's the hybrid human AI approach. And so our approach is to look at the problem space, understand the problem space, and really who's the best agent, if you will, to transform this data. Often we find it's a collaboration between automation and humans at the loop. Bring that intuition and nuance that the humans bring and bring that speed, efficiency out of the AI models and data pipelines bring to maximize both efficiency and quality at the same time. And startups, we help them just get to market faster, all the way to big, magnificent 7 companies that we work with. They have literally billions upon billions of data rows, images. We did a recent project with a large social media company where they want to get their data ready to license and resell to everything from ad tech to, the OpenAI's LLM providers of the world. How do you go from completely unstructured data to well-structured AI-ready data for these markets? How do you understand even things like the semantic connections between your data? A single post on a social media site might contain audio, video, images, and text. Connecting all the dots of this data and how can it be presented to a multimodal generative AI company as a new resource for them as a product is something we specialize in, and understanding the data portion of that journey. And so whether it be doing the transformation step and making that more efficient and taking that operational headache off the company hands, or even starting earlier in the customer journey and understanding that there's a strategic role to play. How can we design the solution given the problem early on in your journey so that we measure twice and cut once, if you will, through that. It makes everyone's lives from us to the customer's life a lot easier when we don't have to redo anything over and over again. And as I mentioned before, we're seeing a lot more demand in the end goals, the quality control and quality assurance. Now that we've deployed these models to the real world, what new data do we need to ensure that quality keeps going? And often we see that turns into things like synthetic data projects or regression testing with our automations or humans. And so really understanding the problem space is step one. And then finding out where you are along that journey and what we can provide as a solution is the next part.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So if I take an example, I don't know if you work with these companies, but let's say like Google's deal with Reddit, like they have billions of rows of data, but like you mentioned, it's all unstructured. So that's where your team would come in. And even if Google's ready to like spend a lot of money here, Reddit will take all your data, but it still needs to be prepared. And is there an analogy to be made with the work that's done on the foundational model side with like RLHF, for instance, right? Like having the human feedback on top of the algorithm. I imagine is a huge component of what you guys are building. It's not just data, it's not just people heavy. You need to have huge kind of like software component as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely true. Like you need a software component to make it efficient. You need a software component that owns the platform play, if you will, to connect the customer data, their work to your teams, your innovations, and then, back to the customer to the value you deliver. But it's also having the right people. I think it comes back to what we talked about before, the hiring component, the knowing the right people job, having the right skill sets in place, and also bringing a bit of a diversification approach to how you approach problem. If we all were based in one geography, one culture, whatnot, might not be able to solve these global problems when it comes to data and transformation. And so having a team that understands the nuances of a more global view can definitely help with providing more enrichment to the data and what the data needs. Another great reason to be in the Montreal ecosystem and have a team that's internationally based is that we bring that global perspective.
And maybe talk a little bit, Nick, about this, the concept of ethical AI and the company is really intentional in terms of giving back to its community, employs a bunch of people, right? So yeah, maybe explain a little bit.
Yeah. So SmartOne, originally born with the founders, Shaista and Habib in Madagascar. I believe it's about 1,000+ people currently employed full-time in Madagascar. And Madagascar, located in Southeast Africa as an island nation, for those that don't know, home of the lemurs. And so we provide opportunity and socioeconomic growth where we can to the people there. And being a great employer in the area, it brings value to the community in a lot of ways. And so as we grow as an employer, we get to see, okay, what do our people need to be successful? We don't have a crowdsourcing model. Everyone is full-time employed. And so this allows us to, one, provide benefits as an employer that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to. One great example is internet access is spotty across Madagascar. Most people don't actually have internet access, mostly mobile based. And electricity is also very spotty across the island nation of Madagascar. And on site at our headquarters, we're sometimes the only source of internet access or even electricity to a lot of the employees. We have healthcare on site. We have eye care on site because we identified those as needs for the people. And it gives access to the tech economy and benefits and mobility to people who have otherwise been left out of the fruits of this tech revolution that we've had access to, for instance, in North America. And, that grows. And part of our ethos is that the company, as it was born there, that spirit carries over, even though we relocated the headquarters, at least the corporate headquarters to Montreal, that spirit carries forward. And we want to make sure that spirit carries forward in AI across the board. AI doesn't need to be the same 5 people from California for like we saw with social media, we have the opportunity now. And I'm a big fan of the Hugging Faces and the Strauss of the world, bringing in a more global perspective to the next generation of AI.
Yeah, yeah, very inspiring, man. And I find that on that last point, I find in AI more so than in B2B SaaS is there is very much this notion of decentralization of open source models. It was the spirit of the researchers, right? I think now we're seeing a bit of the reverse trend. Unfortunately, a lot of the labs not publishing as much, which is slightly alarming, but still, generally speaking, people do tend to publish, which I think is very much needed. And you spoke a little bit about the presence in Montreal, and maybe you could segue talk about the why. Like, why are you spending your time here? You could easily be living anywhere in the world, like particularly California, and maybe probably making more. And then also, yeah, like why have you been attracted to mentorship yourself personally? You're spending a lot of time in it. You mentor a bunch of startups that don't have a lot of money to pay you.
Yeah.
So maybe start with the corporate answer of like why Mila, why here as a corporate headquarters, and then we'll go back to the community.
So I think the answer of why Montreal, the team over at Montreal International, they do a phenomenal job of advertising Montreal. And so I won't lie when I take a lot of their marketing materials whenever I pitch Montreal as a place. But for me, it's my startup foundry hat on. It's the right blend of North American hustle and European culture. I've had companies now in Scandinavia and Europe where things move at a different pace with, different corporate impedances and things like that, that as somebody who wants to move fast, it might get in the way. But I really do enjoy how they treat employees and treat people, for instance. Whereas I've had companies in Texas and whatnot in North America where the hustle is there, the grind is there, but I always feel bad as a Canadian, if you will, that they don't have the same protections. We don't have the same necessarily social safety net when sometimes I have to let go of people. That happens sometimes. I like to know that my employees past have had something to land on and get into the next place. And so for me, that's what Montreal represents. It's that blend between how can we both move fast and break things, but also treat our people well, low cost of living, great culture, great vibe, and just an ecosystem of everything. I'm a big walker downtown, whether at Mila or downtown, 15-minute walk from 5 universities, thousands upon thousands of researchers, grad students, and just a general intellectual crowd of brilliant people, diversity in cultures, backgrounds, and ideas that you don't really get anywhere else. Yeah, there's lots of multicultural cities, but this is like, we're on a, was it 20 kilometer by 40 kilometer island? It's not that big. And yet we're all here in the same community. And so that's my pitch of Montreal is just that density of diversity, culture, and brilliant people to work alongside. And I guess that sort of brings me to the mentorship aspect is because we're such a tight knit community, and I'm a big believer in good karma, if you will. And this was basically my business model in a lot of ways with my fractional CTO consultancy before is if you do, it comes back to you. And as the community builds up, there's going to be more business opportunities across the board. If you're successful, if I'm successful, we'll all be successful. And one of my personal goals is that we can elevate the Montreal ecosystem to be at that level of the Silicon Valleys of the world, where on every street corner, at every Starbucks, there's some founders starting their new idea. I love that idea of just the entrepreneurship and the risk taking. But it takes a community of mentors. It takes a community of support. Like raising a kid, it takes a village. Doing startups, doing innovation and emerging tech, it takes people around you to help you avoid some pitfalls and unlock some doors for you. And to provide that to the community, if I can provide that community, it'll work out for me, it'll work out for everyone.
Yeah. If you had a magic wand, what would you change here? Like you mentioned, we have so many good assets. There's still work. The way I tend to look at it is that the comparison to Silicon Valley is a little bit foolish because they're just on their ninth or 10th generation of building tech companies.
Yeah.
Just like we can't compete with French wine. Like they've just been doing it for a lot longer.
Yes.
And we're earlier in the journey. So I don't find it's a good comparison, but at the same time, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We're definitely punching above our weight. So yeah, then leading into like, what would you change? What would you try and accelerate or maybe do less of?
Yeah, there's definitely, I like it back to the whole mission driven. I like, even though they're on the ninth generation and because of the exits through the dot-com era and things like that's what generated a lot of the wealth and it just propagates and it's a flywheel effect. But it doesn't hurt to look up to them as like a mission vision. Not bow out of the fight, but keep on fighting. And even though we're an underdog, why not try to compete and push ourselves? It's almost like we're the startup and they're the enterprise company that we're trying to target and take down. So never give up, never surrender. But definitely think things I wouldn't change is we always have our complaints about government and bureaucracy and just making access to capital a little easier. I'm super thrilled like BDC with their deep tech fund, unlocking capital for early stage hard tech companies. Think initiatives like that have been great. Love that. Love the startup ecosystem that's opened up. What I find though is there needs to be a little more, this is a controversial opinion of mine, but just because the Canadian grants think you have a good idea doesn't mean you actually have a business model. And so we see a lot of Canadian companies get stuck in a zombie mode where the grants just keep them alive, but there is no actual product market fit. And so what I wouldn't mind to see is a little more strictness on some of those grants and things like that. Cut the losses and move on and focus on business ideas that actually drive value in the market, drive traction, and a bit more of a maybe a focus on customers and selling rather than turtling and develop, but having analysis paralysis and never actually releasing things. I don't know if that comes top down from the government or comes bottom up from the culture and mentors that we build around us. But there's that. And one of my dreams is something like a new lab in New York, in Brooklyn, where we have these maker spaces and these startup hubs where we can build a community all coming together, where we had Notman House that didn't really work out. We have the accelerators like Next AI, the construction lab, but there's no real startup house in Montreal really, where we all could come together and just hang out and bounce off ideas and spend, I don't know, a Saturday morning or something. And so that's definitely something, especially when I was doing more hard tech and robotics. Where can I hang out and see some aluminum? That would have been a fun thing to have.
Yeah, it makes me think of like that place in LA. What is it? I'm gonna blank on the name right now, but it's like all the hard tech startups have gotten together just outside of LA. Segudo, I think. Anyways, but it's essentially what you're describing, like all these deep tech startups that are building like literal science fiction stuff have all come together. And I agree with you, like the loss of Norman House has left a bit of a scar, but I don't think it's going to be a top down solution. I think it's going to be bottom up. It's going to be people like you, thinking the startup events that you do and you host that me love. And I think that's what it's going to take essentially to make it happen. I do think there's a role for government to play. Don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of the more true change is going to come from just people from the community.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so let's raise the boats, the whole community, and bring our capital back to empower the community even more.
Yeah, a rising tide floats all boats, like you said. I think before we started recording, Nick, I can't think of a better way to like cap off the conversation. Maybe final question would be is if people want to learn more about the cool work you guys are doing at SmartOne, get in touch with you. What's the best way?
The best way to get in touch with me is either on LinkedIn, so Nicholas Nadeau, pretty easy to find, I hope. Otherwise, email nicholas@smartone.ai, and you can always find us over at smartone.ai on our website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Nick. This was amazing.
All right, great seeing you, Nectar. Thank you very much for having me.